Aki Tomoya was cycling to deliver his last newspaper of the day when suddenly he saw a white beret flying in the wind. He quickly pedaled to chase after it, and when he finally caught it, he looked back to see who owned it. There stood a beautiful young woman gazing at him. And with that, his fate in this spring season began. The alarm in Tomoya's room rang, prompting him to get up and prepare to head out, but not before he greeted the anime poster on his wall. He set off to deliver newspapers early in the morning, greeting his neighbor who subscribed to the paper. His neighbor asked if Tomoya was now a paperboy and what had happened to his previous job. Tomoya replied that he was still working at the rental store and the restaurant, he just wanted to add a morning job as well. The neighbor praised Tomoya for being so diligent and asked if it was difficult for him to balance work with school. Tomoya admitted he could manage it, especially since he had a big goal he was working toward. Wasting time wasn't an option, so he bid farewell and went on his way. His neighbor wondered what anime Tomoya was currently obsessed with. This morning marked the first day of the new school year at Toyobasaki Private Academy. Sawamura Spencer Ariri was looking at the announcement board of the class lists. All her friends greeted her. This year, Ariri was in Class 2G with Kyo Isumaki and Azusa Satomi, and she was glad to be in the same class as them. Suddenly, she noticed a girl arriving, staring at her even as she passed through the school gate. Tomoya was in Class 2B this year, and he was once again in the same class as Kamibu Yoshihiko. Yoshihiko greeted him, but Tomoya asked him not to bother him because he was busy. Yoshihiko guessed that Tomoya must be compiling info on winter anime or reviewing the light novel released last March. However, it turned out Tomoya had already completed that. He had summarized the anime within 24 hours of the final episode airing, reviewed the novel 3 days after its release, and had even completed the game review. Tomoya's mission was to provide helpful news without spoilers, allowing his readers to enjoy it fully. Yoshihiko called Tomoya a unique kind of blogger and asked what he was working on now. Tomoya explained that he had an important mission, a masterpiece project that would be the beginning of an otaku's life. Just then, Yoshihiko froze, staring out the classroom window and urged Tomoya to look too. Tomoya was annoyed by Yoshihiko's sudden distraction just after he'd answered his question. But Yoshihiko was watching Ariri. She was a half-Japanese, wealthy girl whose father was a British diplomat. What's more, she was the star of the art club, and her artwork had even been accepted for the city art exhibition right after she enrolled here. Tomoya asked why Yoshihiko was so interested in her, and Yoshihiko said Ariri looked even more charming this year. Tomoya asked if Yoshihiko still liked three-dimensional girls, especially when Tomoya himself had already committed to two-dimensional girls. But Yoshihiko pointed out that Ariri was every bit a moe heroine with her pale skin, blonde twin tails, and knee socks, the ideal dream girl from any two-dimensional game. Tomoya replied that three-dimensional girls were just too much trouble. Yoshihiko suggested they go to the opening ceremony together, but Tomoya told him to go ahead. He'd catch up later. Ariri went to her locker and opened it to get her comic, only to hear Tomoya call her careless, saying she usually did miss limited editions. Tomoya informed her that online stores had long since stopped taking orders and that he had pre-ordered from every store that offered exclusive products. Ariri reminded Tomoya not to talk to her at school. Tomoya responded by asking if that was any way to treat the guy who had carried 5 boxes, each weighing 1.8 kilograms, around Akihabara on release day for her. Ariri replied that she'd already given him a bonus poster and said it should be Tomoya thanking her. Then she asked why he was in Class G when he was actually a Class B student. Tomoya was surprised she knew his class placement, considering it had just been announced today. Embarrassed, Ariri said she'd leave if Tomoya didn't have any other business with her. Tomoya called out to her, saying he wanted to talk about something important. However, the opening ceremony was about to start, so Ariri reminded him of that. Tomoya insisted it would be better to say it now, practically begging her to listen. He started telling her about his project plan. Curious, Ariri asked why someone like Tomoya would have such a ridiculous and painful idea. Tomoya was thrilled. She asked and explained that a week ago, he'd experienced a life-changing moment. He described feeling something in his hands that he could only call destiny or maybe even a miracle. He said it felt like a scene from a shoujo manga, a romantic anime, a moe light novel, or the prologue of a dating sim. However, Ariri replied that she had seen that kind of thing a million times and was already tired of it. Tomoya explained that this formula for success worked well and was popular, so he wanted to pour his feelings into it. Ariri asked if Tomoya wanted to make a game that told the story of his encounter with this girl. Tomoya said that when he saw the girl, he could already envision the text and music, almost like it was playing in his head. That was when he realized the only way to tell the story was through a game. Ariri questioned why Tomoya hadn't just chased after the girl and confessed his love. Tomoya countered by asking why he bothered confessing to a three-dimensional girl. Frustrated, Ariri asked if he really wanted to drag her into his little fantasy world. Tomoya pointed out that Ariri was the best illustrator he knew. By day, she was the pride of Toyogasaki Academy's art club, but by night, her secret otaku identity was as the popular 18-plus doujinshi artist known as Egoistic Lily or Kashiwaji Eri. Annoyed, Ariri reminded Tomoya not to use that name at school. Tomoya asked if she considered working on the project, but Ariri declined. Then Tomoya reminded her of the promise they made in grade school. Back then, Tomoya had told her that one day he would be the director of a game company, and when that day came, he would hire her. Ariri had said she would wait for him no matter how long it took and become an artist for his game company. With a toss of her hair, Ariri brushed it off, saying no grade school kid makes a future promise with that much detail. Ariri told Tomoya that if he was really serious about his project, he should be creating the illustrations and script himself, since that's what true doujin artists do. Tomoya said there's no way he could do that, as he'd never be able to capture the girl's beauty, not in a million years. Intrigued, Ariri asked just how beautiful this girl really was, but Tomoya replied that the scene was still etched into his memory. He described her in a white dress and beret, standing on a hill, surrounded by cherry blossom petals blowing in the wind. Ariri pointed out that Tomoya's words didn't give any details about her face. She was sure he couldn't even remember what the girl looked like. Tomoya replied that his feelings weren't about capturing some perfect image. He said he didn't want to lessen her beauty with his attempts. He needed Ariri's illustration skills for that. Frustrated, Ariri tore up Tomoya's project proposal, saying that his thinking was shallow. Tomoya was stunned that a doujinshi artist would say something like that. Ariri argued that if this was supposed to be his grand project and he'd forgotten such a key element, then it was obvious he wasn't serious about it. She called him a fake producer, just looking to take advantage and enjoy the results without real dedication. Tomoya insisted he wasn't half-hearted, he was passionate, filled with ideas, and driven to bring this project to life. Ariri, unimpressed, questioned whether all his ideas fit on a single piece of paper. She suggested it was probably just a simple plot about a boy meeting a mysterious girl, getting close to her, kissing, and then ending it. She scoffed that his so-called unique vision could be summed up in a single sentence. Ariri walked away, ignoring Tomoya's pleas to hear him out. He told her he'd be waiting in the AV lab after school, but Ariri replied it was far too late for him to convince her now. During the opening ceremony, Yoshihiko noticed how dejected Tomoya looked and asked if he'd been rejected by a girl on the first day of school. Tomoya denied it, saying he was just dealing with a major crisis between him and his fresh start as an otaku. But, as usual, Yoshihiko wasn't really listening. Instead, he pointed out a girl named Kasumigoka Utaha. She was the smartest student in the school, ranking number 1 in her class for 2 years straight. Rumor had it that she lived in her own world, always slept in class, and never did her homework. Yet no teacher dared to scold her. Tomoya called Yoshihiko out for acting like he knew Utaha when he'd never actually met her. Utaha was indeed gorgeous and widely considered one of the 2 most beautiful girls at Toyogasaki Academy. Some people even said she was the dark side to Ariri's light side. Tomoya warned Yoshihiko that comparing Ariri and Utaha like that could come back to bite him. Still, Yoshihiko pressed on, saying Utaha had long black hair, a great figure, and wore black stockings. She was practically the perfect moe heroine to rival Ariri. But Tomoya insisted Yoshihiko stop judging them purely based on their appearances. Yoshihiko conceded it was odd that neither girl was ever seen hanging out with guys despite all the admiration they got. He figured they either knew how to hide it well, or maybe they actually dislike men. Tomoya told Yoshihiko not to ask him about it, but Yoshihiko laughed it off, saying he should have known better than to discuss it with Tomoya, the guy who only liked two-dimensional girls. After school, Tomoya met with Utaha, bringing her lunch since he knew she probably hadn't eaten yet. He asked if he could sit beside her, but Utaha just stayed silent and nudged him with her foot as a sign to open her lunchbox. She started eating with enthusiasm and then began asking questions, though her voice was barely audible. Tomoya handed her a drink. When she finished eating, Utaha said it must be because he wanted a favor that Tomoya was willing to show up in front of the woman he long discarded. Tomoya asked her not to say things that could give people the wrong idea and asked for her thoughts on his project plan. He admitted he'd never written a script before and would really appreciate her feedback. He then asked for an even bigger favor, saying he'd be thrilled if Utaha would join the whole project. Utaha's reaction, however, took him by surprise. She immediately crumpled the project proposal paper, saying, "Trash is trash, filth is filth, and ashes remain ashes." Tomoya was shocked, especially since he'd written the proposal with all his heart. Utaha told him that his misguided passion, his blatant naivety, and even his perseverance didn't match up to the appeal of his own name. She wasn't willing to give feedback on something she found unworthy. Tomoya asked if his project was really that terrible. Utaha gave a score of 0, saying parts of it were muddled, predictable from the story and source material alone. The worst part, she added, was that the content wasn't even on par with a pirated copy. She told him that what she'd read so far had left her completely disappointed. Tomoya couldn't believe Utaha thought so poorly of his project. She also said she was too busy to indulge in Tomoya's fleeting desire to start a game production studio. Tomoya insisted it wasn't just a whim. He'd always wanted to make games. He wanted to match, even in some small way, the game creators he admired. He reminded her that Utaha had once suggested that he might or might not have what it took to be a game creator. Utaha didn't remember ever saying that and accused him of trying to change the subject with some underhanded flattery. Tomoya was frustrated with her, especially knowing Utaha was the top student at Toyabasaki Academy and actually the famous high school novelist Kasumi Utako, the author of Koizuru Metronome, which had sold over 500,000 copies. Utaha said that since Tomoya knew who she really was, he should know she was very busy. Tomoya mentioned he knew she recently started a new series and congratulated her on it. She thanked him and started to walk away. Tomoya kept pleading, asking Utaha to meet him in the AV lab after school. Utaha, however, couldn't help but regret that he was only asking for her help now. Tomoya continued working on his project proposal, then headed out to meet Ariuri and Utaha. Suddenly, Kato Megumi called out to him, saying that Ms. Asumi asked him to come to the teacher's room to help carry teaching materials to the AV lab. However, Tomoya replied that he couldn't go right now because he had something important to do and that he would take care of it early tomorrow. Megumi then thanked him for retrieving her white Barrett that had fallen during spring break. Tomoya didn't remember this immediately, since it had been a few days, but then he realized who she was. Meanwhile, Ariuri was waiting in the AV lab. Hearing a noise inside the room, she said that she came not because she agreed with Tomoya's request, but simply because she'd lose sleep if she didn't settle things. Utaha responded by praising her sense of duty, surprising Ariuri, who didn't realize Utaha was there. Shocked, Ariuri yelled, ran up to her, and asked why she was here. Utaha shot back with the same question, asking why Ariuri was there. Ariuri guessed that Tomoya must have asked Utaha to come as well. Utaha admitted that she felt something was off when Tomoya mentioned wanting to make a game, but she hadn't expected him to ask Ariuri to do the character designs. Not wanting to be outdone, Ariuri shot back that Tomoya had asked a gloomy girl like Utaha to write the script. Utaha smirked, sarcastically wondering if it was wise to trust the illustrations to a delinquent who acted like a perfect young lady on the outside but was rotten on the inside. This infuriated Ariuri, who insisted she wasn't a delinquent, while Utaha admitted she might be gloomy, but at least she was more honest with herself than Ariuri. Ariuri warned Utaha to stay away from Tomoya, accusing her of just latching onto him because he reached out. Utaha countered, saying Ariuri had no right to talk since she was doing the same thing. Angered, Ariuri stated that she'd actually come to stop Tomoya because she didn't believe his crazy project would succeed. Utaha casually remarked that if Ariuri felt that way, maybe she shouldn't have come in the first place. Deciding to leave, Ariuri asked if Utaha was planning to stay and entertain Tomoya's wild fantasies. Tomoya interrupted, saying it wasn't Ariuri's concern. Realizing Megumi was the girl he met in the spring, Tomoya went back to her to confirm. Megumi clarified that they were in the same class. Tomoya, still confused, asked if her name was Kanu Megumi, but she corrected him, saying her full name was Kato Megumi. One day in the spring, Tomoya met his destiny. He had long remembered his dream, which was to create a dating sim game that could make people laugh, feel touched, and create a main heroine who could make people's hearts ache. At first, the response from those close to him was cold, but he didn't give up on expressing his dream, and eventually his friends came back to him one by one. He also had a dramatic encounter with that girl, and he started taking the first steps toward realizing his big dream. Ariuri slapped him to snap Tomoya out of his self-deception in the middle of a recap of episode 1. Utaha just watched their debate while working on the project. Tomoya invited Megumi to meet him at a cafe. He told her that he hadn't realized how sweet she was before. Megumi thanked him and said that what Tomoya hadn't realized wasn't her sweetness, but that he had actually never noticed her presence. It turned out that Megumi had been in the same class with him since the first year of high school. She had always been the girl who was close by. The waiter came over to their table and Megumi began to order food. Tomoya observed how sweet Megumi was with a classic charm. She wasn't too tall or too short, her skin was smooth, and her figure was slender with curves in all the right places. It was clear she was a sweet girl, and Tomoya felt a sense of fate connecting him to her. Megumi thanked Tomoya for treating her, but Tomoya apologized for suddenly inviting her to meet. It was a coincidence that Megumi had no plans that day, so she was able to accept his invitation. Tomoya asked about her hat, and Megumi explained that she had given it to her cousin since he had stopped by and liked it, so she gave it to him as a gift. Tomoya realized that this meeting wasn't just about family obligations. Megumi then asked why Tomoya had asked her that, and Tomoya just thought it was a coincidence. However, Megumi said that if Tomoya noticed her, just like how he noticed him, then it wasn't a coincidence. Tomoya complimented Megumi's good memory, saying she could remember such an insignificant otaku. Megumi told him that even though Tomoya was an otaku, he shouldn't consider himself unimportant. Tomoya believed he had no appeal at all. Megumi then pointed out that Tomoya was one of the 3 popular kids at school. He was known for donating light novels to the library, organizing anime screenings during the school festival, and no one at school didn't know Aki Tomoya. Tomoya still didn't believe it because the otaku population had sharply increased, and they were still looked down upon by society. Megumi then said she was the opposite of Tomoya, that she was truly boring. Her grades weren't that great, she wasn't in any clubs, and she had never served in any class leadership positions. Megumi also admitted that she didn't have many friends, but she wasn't interested in making new ones. That's why she wasn't surprised that Tomoya didn't remember her. Tomoya said that was wrong. Megumi wasn't boring, and he asked her not to think of herself that way. He also told her to stop feeling discouraged because of misunderstandings. Tomoya could guarantee that Megumi wasn't boring, it was just that her character was more neutral, not very flashy. In other words, Megumi wasn't perfect yet, which was why she didn't stand out. Tomoya said all of this loudly, drawing the attention of the other cafe patrons. Megumi asked to interrupt his words, asking if that wasn't worse than boring. Tomoya asked her not to underestimate the boring character type because not many characters develop in a way that stays true to themselves. For example, a character with twin braids, glasses, and freckles. If Megumi combined those boring traits, she would become more charming and grab people's attention because that character would be very clear. Tomoya then asked if Megumi had any unique traits that would make her unforgettable when someone looked at her, and the answer was obviously no. Tomoya emphasized once again that Megumi was sweet from the beginning and her character didn't match up at all, and there was something that needed to be done about her personality flaws. Megumi interrupted again, asking if her personality flaws were a problem for Tomoya. Tomoya replied that it was clearly his concern because Megumi needed to be someone special and her personality needed to be clear. Megumi asked what all of that was for, and Tomoya finally said that Megumi was the girl who should be the heroine of his game. Megumi asked again if that was Tomoya's way of confessing his love to her. Tomoya was confused. Megumi did know that Tomoya was talking to her, but it felt like his gaze was looking at something far away. Tomoya thought it wasn't that he was looking far, but more like from a different dimension. He begged Megumi to help him regain his passion for creating again. Megumi was still confused by what Tomoya was talking about, and he pleaded with her to help him bring back his dream. Megumi then asked if Tomoya was dating the 2 most beautiful girls in school. Tomoya responded that there were 3 mistakes in what she just said. First, the most beautiful girls in school only existed in dating sim game and didn't exist in real life. Second, dating 2 beautiful girls at school was not true. And third, the biggest mistake was that a 2D otaku like him could have a 3D girlfriend. Megumi asked then who the girl outside the window was to Tomoya. It turned out that Eriri and Utaha were watching him from outside the cafe window. They then joined Tomoya and Megumi at their table. Megumi asked why Eriri and Utaha were here. Tomoya said that if Megumi recognized them, things wouldn't be so complicated. Megumi recognized both of them as the 2 most beautiful girls at Toyogasaki Academy. Tomoya asked Megumi to stop mixing up dating sim game with reality. But Megumi said that now she was with 3 famous people from Toyogasaki Academy. She felt like just a speck of dust among them. Tomoya told her that although Eriri and Utaha might seem intimidating, they weren't that bad. Even though they had foul mouths and bad personalities, they were otaku on a much higher level than him. Tomoya introduced Eriri and Utaha as members of his game circle. Eriri was the illustrator and Utaha was the scriptwriter. Megumi still didn't understand any of this. Utaha then said that she didn't understand it either and immediately stepped on Tomoya's foot, saying that this was how a guy who had made plans with a girl ended up hanging out with another girl instead. Tomoya introduced Megumi as the newest member of the circle and the main heroine of the game they were going to create. Megumi said that she had just learned about all of this and Tomoya assigned her a role in the project. Eriri stared at Megumi, making Megumi ask Tomoya why Eriri was staring at her. Tomoya told her not to worry about it because that's just how Eriri looked at people. Eriri then realized that the girl Tomoya had been talking about all this time was Megumi. She didn't even care if Megumi was his girlfriend, a fellow otaku, or just a friend looking for some benefits. Megumi was shocked by Eriri's sharp attitude. Tomoya explained that this was Eriri's true nature, and she was just pretending to be innocent at school. Eriri kicked Tomoya and told him not to talk like he knew her so well. Tomoya asked her not to start a fight with someone she had known for years. They continued arguing, which made Utaha tell Eriri to stop embarrassing herself, but Eriri ignored her. Utaha reminded them that it could become a problem if a Toyogasaki student was seen here and referred to Eriri as mispretending to be innocent. Eriri, annoyed, turned and kicked Utaha's leg, causing their fight to attract the attention of the cafe's other customers. Tomoya tried to calm them down, but once again, Aririri and Utaha criticized the project. Aririri said the project didn't yet convey what feelings the players were supposed to express. Utaha even suspected that Tomoya still couldn't picture what he actually wanted to create. Tomoya responded saying that Aririri and Utaha were speaking as though they were the creators. They both simultaneously declared that they were creators. Tomoya was sure they both actually got along well. Aririri said that if things kept going like this, Tomoya's dream of making the game would just stay a dream. Utaha then gave Tomoya an ultimatum. He could either start writing again or give up. Aririri suggested that Tomoya should just give up, and Utaha saw that Tomoya was almost heartbroken over the gap between his dreams and reality. According to Aririri, the concept of a fated meeting wasn't as sweet as a light novel. Utaha didn't argue with her. She said if meetings were based on fate or coincidence, the world would just be full of childhood friends ending up together. Aririri asked if there was something wrong with that, saying she didn't mean it that way. Tomoya said he had already made his decision. Aririri and Utaha asked together who Tomoya had chosen. Tomoya replied that he chose not to give up. He would rewrite as many times as needed until Aririri and Utaha approved. They thought Tomoya was going to choose one of them, but it turned out he was talking about the project. Tomoya was confident he would create the greatest dating sim game that would touch everyone's hearts. He would also turn Megumi into the main heroine who would make everyone's heart flutter. But when they looked around, Megumi was no longer sitting in her seat. They started searching for her and found out that Megumi had stood up to get a drink. None of them had noticed that she had left. The next day, Tomoya invited Megumi to meet up. Megumi came to Tomoya. Thankfully, the weather was nice today. She mentioned that the weather forecast had been doubtful, so she'd been worried earlier. She asked if Tomoya's house was nearby, saying that she occasionally passed by this street. Tomoya asked if Megumi remembered this place. Megumi said the locals called it Detective Hill because there was a detective agency nearby. However, that wasn't what Tomoya meant, so he asked why she thought he chose this place to meet. Megumi assumed it was because the place was close to his house, but Tomoya said that wasn't the reason. Megumi asked if it was because it was far away, which made Tomoya annoyed, and he explained that this was the first place they met. Megumi then said the place they met was during the entrance ceremony a year ago. Tomoya asked if she understood the purpose of today, and Megumi said that Tomoya probably wanted to talk about something, which is why he invited her to his house. Tomoya explained that this was the problem. What kind of girl would go to the house of a guy she just met? He also told Megumi not to dress like a normal person because no one had ever come to his house looking that normal. Megumi also sensed something was off. She suddenly realized that Tomoya would never invite a real-world girl to his house. Tomoya then asked why she still came if she knew he was strange and why she came so easily if he was an otaku. Megumi didn't expect to be lectured like this by the guy who had invited her. Tomoya said that up until now, Megumi had been living an aimless life, and today he was going to teach her how to live in the real world. Megumi started to suspect that maybe Tomoya's room had been designed so no one could hear her screams for help. Tomoya told Megumi to prepare herself because he was going to fill her head with moe content. They entered Tomoya's house and Megumi was amazed by the sight of his room, which truly reflected the life of an otaku. Tomoya blamed Megumi for acting so casually and said that she should have immediately commented on how hot it was and opened the window or pretended to sit on the bed and act awkwardly. She should have acted like that. Megumi asked why Tomoya expected her to ruin the mood by being tense like that. Tomoya was confident he could get the right reaction from Megumi soon. Today was a training session to enhance Megumi's 2D heroine sensitivity. Tomoya then offered Megumi all the dating sim game visual novels he had, telling her they were all famous ones that could make her laugh, cry, or even faint. Megumi chose the shortest one. Tomoya selected a dating sim game titled Dear Memories, a legendary game that had sold over 300,000 copies and was adapted into an anime. The game began, and Megumi chose the option to give the character a gift instead of inviting them home or suggesting a night view. Tomoya said that her choice was wrong, but Megumi argued that giving a gift was a natural choice to make their date memorable. Tomoya considered Megumi to be insensitive. He told her that the point of the game wasn't about giving a keepsake, but about creating memories together. Megumi said that what mattered most was the memory they shared, not the gift itself. Tomoya agreed, mentioning that giving a gift could lead to awkwardness after a breakup. He then told Megumi to take a break while he explained something. He began teaching her about the heroine of a dating sim game, something Megumi didn't know much about. He explained that heroines in dating sim game were representations, not robots that always give the same answers when a player clicks on certain points. They were warm-blooded humans, more captivating than real girls. That's how Megumi should be. Megumi responded, saying that this meant the heroines could change or even break up with the player. Tomoya couldn't even imagine a 2D girl breaking up with him. He couldn't live without her. They finished the game and Tomoya was crying after hearing a particular scene. He asked Megumi if she didn't think that scene was incredibly sad. Megumi said that she should have been moved. Tomoya believed that Megumi finally understood that the dialogue and the inserted songs were truly amazing. But this wasn't the real climax yet. After this, something even more amazing would happen, so she should get ready to be in awe, because to save the main character, the female character was willing to make a sacrifice. Megumi said it was very interesting and that maybe she could enjoy playing it peacefully if no one had spoiled the plot for her. She would have definitely cried. The game ended and Megumi didn't expect the plot to end so unexpectedly. Tomoya was also surprised because Megumi turned out to be someone who enjoyed going on adventures. Tomoya asked her what she thought after finishing the game. Megumi felt mixed emotions but found it enjoyable in the end. The graphics were sweet, the voice actors were dramatic, the music was good, and the story was interesting. She also learned about dating sim game and anime like this, but that didn't mean she didn't know anything. Tomoya was happy. There was no doubt that Megumi was the right girl for him. Tomoya said that this was the kind of heroine he wanted to instill in Megumi. Megumi responded, asking if that meant she was suddenly going to die like in the game. Tomoya asked her not to compare the game to the type of scumbags who kill off heroines just for an emotional response. But it seemed like Megumi didn't quite understand. Tomoya explained using a metaphor, no great weapon is made carelessly and critiques shouldn't make someone lose their way. Instead, it should look at the bigger picture with clear eyes. He also suggested considering the most captivating interpretation for the players. Suddenly, Tomoya remembered the criticisms from Eriri and Utaha. He realized that he himself was the one who didn't understand. Tomoya thanked Megumi because, thanks to her, he had learned the most important lesson of all. After that, Megumi said her goodbyes to head home. But Tomoya told her that there was a sequel to the game. And this was the beginning of the story, the birth and rise of it. He wouldn't spoil the plot and quickly set up the game again. However, Megumi said it was probably already midnight and the game wouldn't be finished by then. Tomoya replied that his parents were out of town for a picnic, and since it was Saturday and the next day was a school holiday, he insisted Megumi stay over. He begged her to stay and help him become a true man. Megumi was, of course, shocked. She said she called her parents to let them know she'd be home late. Tomoya asked if Megumi was sure because in this situation, he wouldn't dare take responsibility if anything happened. Megumi replied, asking if they were going to stay up all night playing the game.